So good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everyone who's joined us from around the world today. Thank you for joining us, taking time out of your busy schedules. My name is Brian Lewis, and I'm the president of KidneyCAN. I'm so pleased to have you join us on our inaugural 2022 Town Hall, looking back and looking forward at the latest breakthroughs in research. I just want to say thank you to all of those who've joined us from across the globe. We have folks that are dialed in from Egypt, and from Thailand, and from the UK. It also looks like from Japan and the Ukraine and Germany. Welcome. We'll try to speak slowly for you all. Also want to thank our sponsors for making this possible today, to Bristol Myers Squibb, along with Exelixis, ASI, and Genentech. It's my pleasure now to introduce two of our two speakers today. I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Martin Voss, who's a medical urologist out of Memorial Sloan Kettering. Dr. Voss. Thank you for being here. Also pleased to have Dr. Robert Uzzo from right here in our backyard at Fox Chase Cancer Center. He's a urological surgeon. Dr. Uzzo, thanks for joining us today. Great, great. So with that, I'm going to hand this off right away to Dr. Voss, and I'm going to turn my camera off and let Dr. Voss tell us a little bit about last year, and look forward to hearing from you, Dr. Voss.
Thank you, Brian. Let me just share my screen here. Okay, so thanks everyone for attending today. And thank you, Brian, for the kind introduction. It's a real privilege to be here to speak today, and I appreciate the invitation to share updates. And Dr. Uzzo and I have been tasked to review relevant milestones of 2021 and ongoing research efforts and things that are in the making for 2022 and onwards. My job here is to be looking back, and Dr. Uzzo is going to be looking forward, but I think we'll probably both be doing a little bit of both. But I was asked by Brian and his team to highlight relevant data and particularly breakthroughs in that we saw emerge in 2021. And, I have a brief time window here that I've been given to present, and there's just so much that has come to fruition this year. It's been quite productive for the kidney cancer research community. So I'm very happy to share with you. I'm a GU medical oncologist with a focus in kidney cancer. So I treat patients with advanced cancers of the kidney, and my research efforts are all in drug and biomarker development in this space. So the review of 2021 that I provide today is very much that of the medical oncologists, less so that of a surgeon. My disclosures here, and I'm going to start here with an overview over historic timelines of drug development in kidney cancer. So for geomedical oncologists, these are the tools that we have at hand to help patients who are diagnosed with advanced cancers of the kidney. And it's no secret that there's been great success over the last 2 decades in this disease, which you see summarized here. 2021 was a special year for many of us because it marked the threshold where we crossed the 20th FDA approval for medications approved for this cancer, which is unprecedented. There are many cancers that, like kidney cancer, at one point are inherently difficult to treat with systemic therapy. If we go all the way back to the 1990s, we see a time when there was great difficulty managing advanced disease, because this cancer, as all of you will know, and with the exception of some rare variants, tends to be unresponsive to cytotoxic chemotherapy. And out of that emerged the need to develop therapies based on understanding the biology of kidney cancer. That came to fruition in the early 2000s and has since then led to this landslide of developments. And if I think through what makes 2021 special, we can think through certain developments through the years that really led to what we would consider paradigm shifts. Everything that you see on this slide matters. Everything is relevant to patient care and to the betterment of those that we care for in our clinics. But through the years, there were certain developments and certain approvals that truly changed how we manage kidney cancer conceptually. And that started in 2006 when targeted therapies replaced cytokine therapy as the mainstay of care based on randomized data. More of these medications were approved. And in 2015, there was another big change with the introduction of targeted immunotherapy. Most of you will know that kidney cancers were amongst the first cancers to have been found, sensitive to PD-1 inhibition. More treatments got developed through the years. And in 2018, we saw the approval of the first combination therapy with ipilimumab and nivolumab, and there have been several since then. Now, 2021, which is what I'm talking about today, to me saw 3 relevant breakthroughs plus additional approvals, and I want to speak a little bit to those. But before we go to the FDA approvals and how they shape the armamentarium of treatments that we have, I want to briefly touch base on non-clear cell kidney cancer variants because they tend to be left out in these overviews, and that's unfair to the patients that are diagnosed with rare kidney cancer entities. In 2021, there were some relevant findings that help us manage our patients with non-clear cell kidney cancer variants better, specifically papillary kidney cancer. There was a big publication referenced here on the left that for the first time conducted a study across multiple US and Canadian sites that compared different types of targeted therapies specifically in this one entity and helped us understand how to better choose amongst various agents that are available and established cabozantinib as a very good agent in papillary kidney cancer. And then a second study that I think was landmark trial, albeit small in numbers, was a study that approved the combination of TKI plus immunotherapy, which by most is now considered a gold standard for clear cell kidney cancer, to be effective in certain non-clear cell variants also, and was able to bring that paradigm home for the patients with this rare entity of kidney cancer. So those two, I think, are practice changing for us and are relevant to patients specifically with unclassified and papillary kidney cancers. Now let's look at the FDA approvals that we saw come through in 2021. And I want to emphasize that all of these matter. I've highlighted 3 of them because I think they are relevant in that they add something truly novel to how we manage kidney cancers. But each of these approvals matters because they bring new combinations, new agents, and additional options to our patients. Cabozantinib nivolumab was approved as another TKI IO combination. I've highlighted the second one here in red as a breakthrough. This is tivozanib, an oral kinase inhibitor drug, which was approved as the first medication specifically studied in patients who are heavily pretreated. So the registration trial and now the FDA label is based on data specifically looking at patients who have already had 2 or more prior therapies. It's the only medication that we have developed so late in the course of a patient's kidney cancer journey. And I think that is relevant because we don't only want to think about the first line of therapy. Lenvatinib pembrolizumab is highly effective in the first line and was rightfully FDA approved in that setting as another agent combination. And then here we have belzutifan, which was FDA approved in August of this year. Now, belzutifan is a targeted medication that was developed in a very clever way to block the processing and activation of the hypoxia-inducible factor, or HIF, and with that can be highly effective to treat various clinical sequelae of the VHL syndrome. So patients with hereditary VHL syndrome are at risk for developing clear cell kidney cancer, but can also develop tumors of the CNS, pancreatic malignancies of other kinds. And this medication, by getting to the core of why this syndrome leads to the development of all of these different tumors, has been shown to block all of them. So it's not only a kidney cancer treatment, it can also treat CNS tumors, pancreatic tumors, pheochromocytomas, and so forth. And it's the first agent to be developed and approved specifically for hereditary cancer syndrome and for VHL, a huge achievement for the field. And then lastly, Adjuvant pembrolizumab was FDA approved in November of 2021 and is in of itself the first approved immunotherapy in non-metastatic kidney cancer. So this was approved based on a trial that compared pembrolizumab immune therapy for 1 year versus placebo therapy in patients who had undergone nephrectomies or other cancer surgeries that left them free of disease on their scans, with the intent to prevent or modulate the risk of the cancer subsequently recurring. Was a positive study and led to the FDA approval. It's the first time we are bringing immunotherapy into this earlier space in kidney cancer development and opening this as an option to patients and doctors in a completely new context. So I told you each of the medication that are developed matters, even if it may not be everyone's favorite. And it matters because it's not only to be seen by itself, but it's to be seen in a context. In 2006, when we had the first targeted therapies approved, we could essentially choose between 2 different strategies, and that was it. In 2015, we had several targeted agents approved, and we were talking quite a bit about the sequencing. Do we go 1 to 2 to 1? Or do we go A to B to C? This is where we're at in 2021. And this may not be sort of the perfect depiction of all the sequences that we can choose, but what this is meant to show you is that as we grow out our armamentarium, as we expand our toolkit as treating physicians, there's more and more and more options we can pursue with our patients. There's more and more ways that we can try to control cancer, treat cancer, and make the cancer better. So we can work with novel drugs. And what I haven't spoken to is all the new trials that emerged in 2021 and have not grown, far enough to show us the results and judge if they're going to be successful. But rest assured, we are hard at work working on novel combination, looking at triplets, looking at novel immunotherapy drugs, looking at combinations after combinations, and so forth. All of the above makes me incredibly excited, makes me very hopeful for any of my patients that walk into my door to talk to me about new treatment options. And at the end of the day, makes me very grateful. I'm so proud of every patient that pursues investigational agents with us on clinical trials. It takes so much dedication and determination on part of the patients and their caregivers. And we, as a community of drug developers, are incredibly thankful to all of you for what you do.
Dr. Voss, thank you very much. Appreciate you taking us on a quick look over last year. That was excellent. It's inspiring a lot of hope to see some of those breakthroughs coming through for the kidney cancer community. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Of course.
I think before we get to Dr. Uzzo, we have one quick question or one question for you, Dr. Voss. I think I'm going to be joined by one of my colleagues from Massachusetts. I'm not sure if she's been pulled up yet or not. Any chance we could pull up? Not right now.
Just in the interim. Just bear with me. Just landing.
Okay. Hey, there's Chandra. Nice to see you, Chandra. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me, Brian?
Perfect. Go right ahead.
It's great to see you. Thank you so much. Dr. Voss, thank you for your presentation. So I had a question. Belzutifan was recently approved for VHL patients. Can you tell us about its successes so far and how it may be used for other RCC subtypes?
Yeah, absolutely. Such an important question. I sort of just very briefly touched upon this. So belzutifan is an oral medication that was approved earlier this year, as I just showed in the slide before, in the setting of hereditary kidney cancers that arise in patients with VHL syndrome. And it was specifically studied in this setting because we know that the genetic disorder that is passed on from parents to their children that predispose VHL families to the development of kidney cancers and other type tumors essentially go down to like one specific genetic alteration that is functional loss of VHL. And as the next molecular event, once VHL is not working, activation or increased levels of this protein or signaling molecule called HIF. And it's a HIF inhibitor, belzutifan, so it gets to the core of everything that predisposes these patients to the development of tumors and cancers. And by suppressing that mechanism, it can now, in one swift strike, address all of these different disorders that can arise in a VHL patient, be it CNS tumors in the brain, in the eye, in the spine, kidney tumors, metastatic kidney tumors, pheochromocytomas, and so forth. This study, which was a phase 2 trial published in the New England Journal of Medicine recently, tested patients that specifically had developed kidney cancers in the syndromic setting of VHL. But of course, these patients had, tended to have a host of other VHL problems that had arisen in the course of their lives. So the folks that ran the trial had the opportunities, while they were testing what it would do to the kidney cancers, they were able to also see what would happen to the tumors they had in their brains, the changes they had in their eyes, the spine changes. And lo and behold, not only did the tumors in the kidney shrink for most of these patients, so did a lot of the other VHL related symptoms. In fact, the majority of patients saw benefit across the board for all of their VHL related abnormal findings on scans, had they been related to RCC or not. It's just amazing to see those images on the report, and those were, as long as the patient stayed on the medication, these seem to be lasting effects. Lastly, the same principle can be applied in non-hereditary clear cell kidney cancer, because we know the genetics and the molecular underpinnings of patients who develop cancer in the course of their life but don't have a family history for clear cell kidney cancer often depend on the same molecular mechanisms as hereditary kidney cancer. And it does appear to be a quite effective medication. There are a number of trials now that have been tested for belzutifan in patients who have metastatic clear cell kidney cancer outside of the syndromic setting. So this medication is very much the center of attention when we talk at kidney cancer meetings. There are combinations with immunotherapy, combinations with TKI that are being tested. This is not approved for sporadic kidney cancer yet, but there's a lot of efforts ongoing to extend that benefit and hopefully the label from hereditary kidney cancers to kidney cancers in the non-familial space.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Voss, and thank you, Chandra, for joining us. Appreciate that question. It's now my pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Voss. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Uzzo to talk to us a little bit about what's coming down the pike. So thank you, Dr. Uzzo. It's your turn.
Thank you for this invitation. I'm going to give you a more decidedly surgery-based talk. And looking forward to 2022, really, I think one of the more clinically important questions is how do you integrate surgery and all these new medical advances in systemic therapies? And at what point does the science drive those decisions? So here are my disclosures. Importantly, I need to disclose that we just updated the AUA guidelines on the management of localized kidney cancer. This just came out this past year, and it's an important document that really is based not only for clinicians, but also for patients. And I give you the URL there. So there's lots of surgical trends that we can talk about in kidney cancer. There's new imaging modalities, something called sestamibi scan, which is being used to evaluate oncocytomas. We're doing a lot more biopsies these days for kidney cancer for risk stratification. We're doing a lot more watchful waiting of small renal masses. And when we can't do that, a lot of different types of percutaneous ablation. There's lots of trials looking at the role of stereotactic radiotherapy for primary and even locally advanced kidney cancers. In the past, we used to just do that for therapeutic, for palliative reasons, but now more for therapeutic reasons. The decisions in terms of how do you go about the surgery, should you do it robotically, should you do it open, should you do it a partial nephrectomy or a radical nephrectomy? I'm not going to talk about those very much. I will speak a little bit about how you make those decisions because it's important for patients to understand. And then we'll also sort of talk briefly about the fact that there's more attention towards preserving kidney function. And the idea that we really do need to understand and contextualize the chronic kidney disease stage before we make any decisions about operating on a kidney. But I'd say most of what I'm going to talk to you about is how do you integrate surgery with systemic therapies. And I'm going to tell you that by and large, this is a difficult question because we've debated about it for a long time in terms of should you take out a kidney in a patient that's got metastatic disease, or when should you take out a metastatic focus in the lung or the liver or someplace else? I'm going to go through with you three very quick thoughts about the basic principles of surgical oncology. And the first one, and this is sort of as enunciated by a guy named Blake Cady about 2 decades ago at the New England Surgical Society. And he said, tumor biology, when making a decision for surgery, is king. Now, we don't fully understand tumor biology, but I will like to share with you an anecdote and tell you where it leads me. So a patient came to me several years back with this tumor in her kidney. You can see this in the left kidney. And I asked her a very simple question. I said, did you have a scan in the past 5 or 6 years? And she said, I did. And here's what it looked like. It wasn't there. The tumor simply wasn't there 4 years ago. That led me to sort of ask the simple question, when does kidney cancer start? When does the biology of kidney cancer begin? And so we published on this for patients that we went back on. I found somewhere around 100 of these kinds of cases where patients had a prior tumor, prior scan that was negative, and then 4 to 5 years later, they had a tumor present. What we found is if you look here at time 0, this is when the patient showed up. The patient showed up at time 0, that many of these tumors were present from 5 to 8 years before they were presented to us in the clinics with their kidney mass. Most of them were non-metastatic, but it just tells you about the latent biology of kidney cancers. Many of these kidney cancers, and of course, they're all very heterogeneous, but many of these kidney cancers evolve over long periods of time. And so what I want to tell you about biology being king really comes from this landmark study called the TRACE-RX trial. This is out of England, and the TRACE-RX trial asked about the initial events that caused kidney cancer, the initial biological events. Now, I want to point out that a tumor is really only called once it's about 1 centimeter big. A 1 centimeter tumor's got about 1 billion cells in it. 1 billion cells in a centimeter tumor. Most cancer burden, most tumor burdens in cancer patients is about 1 trillion cells. Now, we talk about 1 billion, we talk about 1 trillion. I just want to give you a nice analogy to understand the difference because, you know, we talk about it as if it's just a bigger number. But 1 billion seconds is about 32 years. 1 billion seconds is about 32 years. 1 trillion seconds is about 32,000 years worth of seconds. So that's the difference between a 1 centimeter tumor and what most advanced kidney cancer patients have, trillions of cells. And I'm not going to go through the science here, but it was fascinating that when they did the science, these investigators noted that the most common loss, a 3P loss, a mutation at the short arm of the 3rd chromosome, may begin not 3, not 5, not 10 years before kidney cancer begins, but decades. In some cases, 10, 20, 30 years before the kidney cancer presented. That's what the biology shows. And so what we're talking about now is that cancer is an ecosystem. And I know that most of you sort of can understand what I mean by that. It is sort of many, many, many trillions of cells competing in an evolutionary sort of survival of the fittest, if you will. And so when we start to think about sequencing surgery, and when we think about sequencing medical oncology and multiple doublets, triplets, we're talking about how do we affect that ecosystem and how unique is that ecosystem within any patient's body. This is a trial that was done many years ago, 10 years ago now. And what they did is they took one single patient who had advanced kidney cancer, and they took multiple biopsies from the primary tumor, from the metastasis, and they looked to see what kind of mutations were in this one single patient. And they found that the mutations in one spot of the tumor, which were much different than the mutations in another spot of the tumor, and they were much different than the mutations in a third or a fourth or a fifth spot of the tumor. These were all very what they called private mutations. So this is indeed an ecosystem. And as you ask about 2022 and what we're talking about looking forward, it's about trying to understand the many pathways that these cells can undergo and how our therapies may force a cell in one direction or another direction, and how we might be able to take advantage of the ability to move cells and those clones in that ecosystem, either surgically or medically, in the proper direction. And so what I like to say is that this is how kidney cancer sort of biology starts. It starts very heterogeneous with lots of clones. And those clones can survive a long, long time before they become anything worse than they started as. It is indeed sort of a swamp or an ecosystem of many different types of billions and trillions of clones that all may be sort of interrelated, but very different. So it is indeed the survival of the fittest cell that we worry about. These cells diversify, they select, they amplify, and that's what we don't want. We don't want them to amplify. And so if you start to talk about sort of surgery versus medical therapy, the question really is what they call, Stephen Gould, one of the evolutionary biologists from Cornell years ago, called punctated equilibrium. Most patients will have these cells that will sort of go through these phases, if you will, and then they'll stop or pause. And then we could change that trajectory with our medicines or our surgeries, and then they may bump up again. And that's why you have these sort of multiple pathways and these multiple medications that we try to intervene at different time points with different strategies. So this is just sort of a linear look at how those mutations that start the series of events that lead to kidney cancer, indeed probably most cancers, can be decades in the making. They could progress locally, then they can start to spread. And what we do is we have all sorts of different random pressures. Our bodies try to catch those mistakes. Our immune system tries to correct those mistakes. And then we as clinicians start to apply surgery or other medications to sort of push the cells in a specific direction. This is where we're going in 2022. This is where the science is leading us. And so in thinking about this, I thought, I was sort of talking at one point to my daughter about this and trying to come up with a nice analogy. And we came up with this minions analogy. So here you are. If a tumor has lots and lots of genomic instability, it's making lots of mutations, versus if a tumor has lots of different types of clones. And so if you've got good minions, lots of clones that are all the same, but not very aggressive, that is not an aggressive form of kidney cancer. But if you've got lots of bad minions, lots of clones that sort of look really sort of resistant to our therapies, that's what you're trying to get away from. And then of course, you've got sort of which of these is winning in a various time point. And this is how we start to think about the clonal evolution and how we're going to affect your treatments with our surgeries or our systemic therapies. So we could start to look at the clones, and this is where we're going. And as we do that, we can start to pick out, well, do we have lots of bad clones? Do we have lots of good clones? Do we have only bad clones or only good clones? And that's what we're trying to figure out when we decide, are we going to go in one direction with surgery, or are we going to give you some sort of a systemic therapy? So yes, trying to figure out the ecosystem that is individual cancers in individual patients. Now, I said biology is king, case selection is queen. This is the art of medicine, picking the right team. I think all the people here know that. you've got to be able to figure out, does the doctor, does the surgeon, does the medical oncologist have sort of the experience to sort of integrate the preoperative factors, the intraoperative factors. A case like the one I'm showing you here, most people wouldn't approach that with a portion nephrectomy, not because it's biologically wrong, but just simply because it's clinical decision-making. This lady, in fact, did have a portion nephrectomy. She was very motivated to do so and has been cured from her kidney cancer. Again, it's clinical decision-making. And then finally, the king is biology, the queen is natural, is selection, and the prince and the princess are the therapies that we give to people trying to affect the biology. So I'll end with this notion of adjuvant therapy, the true integration of surgery and medical therapy. And we've tried many things, in, as you know, in the TKI era. The one that stands out is adjuvant sunitinib, but we're moving now to the immunotherapy era, and we've moved through various adjuvant therapies. And the one that's sort of come to the fore is Keynote 564, as Dr. Voss mentioned, adjuvant pembrolizumab. And here's what it showed, and it led to the approval. The integration of surgery and medical therapy, in this case, immunotherapy, seems to work. It doesn't work in everybody, but it shows that in principle, adding immunotherapy to patients after they've been fully resected is indeed a strategy to improve outcomes, to improve survival, and to improve lives. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Uzzo. Really appreciate that. Looking forward a few minutes. Now I'm going to call Dr. Voss up as well. And we're going to turn it over to some of the patients and caregivers around the country, around the world, who have sent in some questions. First up, I think we're going all the way out to Ohio, if I remember correctly. Hopefully we'll get to hear from, let's see, is it Tracy? Tracy in Ohio, yes. Come on up.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to Dr. Voss and Dr. Uzzo for your wonderful overviews and presentations. So I'd like to kick off the patient questioning this afternoon with your opinions on what you think new or developing treatments are the most exciting for stage 4 cancer patients with kidney cancer.
So I'm happy to answer. So, you know, emerging kidney cancer treatments. So there's different ways to answer this, right? So what I reviewed in my slide deck are achievements, breakthroughs, and new approvals that already came through in 2021 based on clinical trials that have already been approved. I do think that the HIF inhibitor belzutifan is incredibly exciting because it adds a completely new angle to what we can do using it by itself and in combination with other therapies such as lenvatinib, immunotherapies, and so forth. And it is so broadly applicable to patients with clear cell kidney cancer. So in terms of achievements for this year, I think the fact that we have a new mechanism of action, and there are other companies now working on HIF inhibitors, so this will not be the only one, I think sort of opens a lot of new avenues moving forward. The fact that we have an adjuvant approval is a huge achievement to the fields and for patients, because remember, everything that I've shown you in the timeline that opened, you know, my presentation, you know, were treatment strategies tailored towards metastatic disease, and having an immunotherapy trial succeed in the non-metastatic setting now obviously, you know, crack the door open to a lot of efforts that are going to come in that space also. Now, your question specifically was about stage 4 metastatic disease and exciting emerging therapy. So beyond what I presented, I do think that various triplet therapies that are being investigated are incredibly interesting to me. And what I mean by that is we have shown going from 2006 to 2015 and into 2018-19 that giving 2 medications for many patients with newly diagnosed metastatic disease can be more efficacious than giving 1. Coming at the cancer from 2 different angles, be it with 2 different immunotherapies or with an immunotherapy and a TKI targeted therapy, seems to be at the very least additive and really increase the likelihood of controlling the cancer, shrinking tumors, and having patients clear their scans in some cases also. Now, currently, there's new trials that are trying to come at the cancer from 3 different angles. We call that triplet therapies instead of doublet therapies. And while that, of course, raises questions for what added toxicity we might see, obviously the hope that the field holds is that we may push the needle further and further and further in terms of the likelihood of broadly being able to achieve control and not have patients sort of grow through something that we so aggressively treat.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Voss. Thank you, Tracy, for your question. I don't know, Dr. Uzzo, if you had anything, would you like us to just move on to the next question?
I would just add that there's an adjuvant trial coming forward. That's belzutifan plus pembrolizumab. The goal is to prevent metastatic disease. I think with a positive adjuvant trial in the IO space, we're well on our way. There's a couple of other those trials that are going to read out this year as well, but these combinations that work in metastatic cancer are likely to be tested in the adjuvant setting as well.
Great. Thank you for that. All right, we're going to move back over to the East Coast. It looks like we've got Brian. Brian, we'll pull you up. Go ahead, Brian, you can unmute. Brian, are you there? There he is. You got to unmute for us, Brian.
There we go. All right. I was afraid this low. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're looking good. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, my name is Brian. I'm a 2-year survivor on Ipi/Nivo. And my question is, are there any studies underway or planned regarding discontinuance of treatment after a complete response or lengthy stable disease?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question, and one that is debated much in the field. So what Brian is referencing here is, there are, of course, patients who have tremendous responses to therapy, and specifically with immunotherapy, there are patients who achieve CRs or complete disappearance of cancerous lesions on their scans. And the question that raises is, for ipilimumab, nivolumab, we give or take see that in 1 of 10 patients. So if that happens, the question is, do you continue the therapy? The original trials that led to the approval of this very regimen were not time limited. So you would do the inductions of ipilimumab, nivolumab, and then immunotherapy maintenance open-ended. And the question that has been raised, early on is that really necessary? If the cancer had such a brisk response to the immune activation, why not stop the therapy and see how that's going? So there are trials. In fact, many of the immunotherapy trials that we're doing now limit the amount of immunotherapy we're getting. Many trials that we're getting that combine a pill and an immunotherapy stop the immunotherapy after a given time of year, typically 1.5 years or 2 years, and only give the pill onwards. And then there are trials where we give immunotherapy alone, where we stop after 2 years. Ipilimumab, nivolumab was read out earlier than any other registration trial in the combination immunotherapy space. So all the other studies that came afterwards are lagging behind, but some of those stopped immunotherapy. Pembrolizumab, axitinib, pembrolizumab, and lenvatinib, both are registration trials that stopped after 2 years of immunotherapy, and only the pill would carry on. So there are ongoing efforts to analyze data beyond that 2-year point, but because these approvals came in 2019, 2020, and 2021, we're not quite there yet. So we will see that data emerge. And there are new trials that are very much looking into that question.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Dr. Uzzo, if any comments before we move on?
I would only add that increasingly we're asking ourselves the questions that when you've had a really great response, can we remove it surgically and stop the medication? That's another option. And there are trials looking at that. Not everybody is amenable to that because of where it's located or how many spots there are, but by and large, that's part of that integration discussion that we're having.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. All right, it's my pleasure now to bring up a good friend from the Philadelphia area. Glenn, you out there?
I'm here, Brian.
Hi.
So thank you to our presenters. It's such a hopeful time for kidney cancer patients listening to this presentation, and particularly Dr. Voss's timeline of where things are. I'm 11 years into this, so the progress is really outstanding. At the same time, I think for me and a lot of patients probably on the call and caregivers, the value in these combinations and potential combinations, doublets, triplets, quadruplets, wherever we're going to go, is that it gives me more time to enjoy family and friends personally. But from a medical perspective, and I never lose sight of this, the time's important because it suggests that if I have more time, I might be around here for a cure. And that still eludes us, really. And so now my question, and it's related to the first question, but maybe it's asking you to look even further ahead than what you're thinking now, and maybe things that you feel when you look a little farther ahead. Where are the next, round of durable complete responses coming from for our large number of patients? You mentioned, Ipi/Nivo 1 out of 10. That's still a low number for us to have as a patient community. So what are the research areas that you look at, you're hearing about from colleagues a little further out, maybe in the 5 to 10 year range that you feel looks promising for us? Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously that's an incredibly important question. Complete remissions aren't something we used to speak much about until we started to do immunotherapy trials, and then certainly they've become sort of top agenda items since the combination trials have come about. And the sense certainly is that the patients that are most likely to have these deep durable remissions are the ones that truly have activation of their immune system towards the cancer. And there's a lot of work that is going into this in the biomarker development space, where we are trying to really understand, analyzing tumor samples from those patients who truly benefited much and those who did not, to understand how the immune composition, the immune cells that were already sitting close to or inside the tumors, differs for those who have these tremendous responses and those who don't. And if we understand that biology better, then we can try to design treatments that really go after these specific immune cells. We always talk about, and we have these very simplified cartoons about activating, the T cells towards the cancer cells and so forth. Truth of the matter is there's many, many different immune cells in and around these tumors, and it's not just one type cells that brings about these responses. And it may be different cell types for different patients. So I think the biomarker pieces that go into developing targeted immunotherapies and looking into other targets than just PD-1, PD-L1, CTLA-4 are going to, help us identify more of these deep response patients. And we can see some of that play out for our colleagues in other cancers also. So melanoma, for instance, recently had a very successful registration trial for a new immunotherapy target, LAG-3, that is also being explored in kidney cancer in combination with PD-1. So we are learning about new immunotherapy activator molecules that we can target. But we also can see that immunotherapy combined with other treatments can be very effective. So for instance, in bladder cancer, we are seeing that there are certain chemotherapies that are brought into the cancer cells by carrying molecules together with immunotherapy can have tremendously high responses. And all of those principles are being applied in kidney cancer. So for instance, these triplets trials that I talked about, a lot of it is using one medication to control the cancer with an agent that may not have durable response, so that the immune therapy has ample time to take its full effect, versus if we only gave immunotherapy, maybe the cancer would sort of outpace the immune system and the immune therapy would never really, catch things. So there are, some of those trials are going to read out in the next year or two. And I think the question is going to be, can we push up the response rates that went from 5% with immunotherapy alone to 10 to 15% with combinations, to hopefully north of that, with 3 drug combinations.
Great. Thank you for the question, Glenn. Dr. Uzzo, anything to add on that?
I would just add that when I was in training, immunotherapy was almost dead. People were giving interferon and there was not a whole lot of excitement or activity, and it was resurrected and for the better. I would say the same thing probably is what's going to happen with vaccines, cancer vaccines. You asked us to sort of project forward 5 or 10 years. The uniqueness of everybody's tumor is best captured by harvesting the tumor and generating perhaps a unique immune response. In some way, we believe that might be possible with a vaccine. So more to come, but that's what I would sort of look forward to.
Yeah, there are also completely new immune strategies that are emerging in the clinics, not just in the lab. So for instance, CAR T-cell therapies, which are some molecularly designed immune cells that can be infused into the patients to attack the cancer in a guided fashion, have been a great success in lymphomas, leukemias, and are now entering into the solid tumor sphere. And there are clinical trials for kidney cancer now that have started. Oncolytic viruses, where we inject viruses that specifically infect and kill cancer cells, but not human cells, are being explored for kidney cancers. And there are combinations of these new strategies with immune therapies that we already work. And those are not, what I'm talking about are not trials that we're doing in Petri dishes or in animals. Those are, clinical trials conducted in patients, some of which started this year and last, some of which are starting next year.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, Glenn. I appreciate that. I have a question from the UK from Naila, and it's pretty much similar to what Dr. Voss, you started answering earlier. Are there any new trials on the horizon for rare subtypes? So if you wanted to continue maybe with your answer before, or Dr. Uzzo, if you want to jump in.
Rob, do you want to go first?
This is primarily a medical oncology question. Martin, I'm going to defer to you.
Okay, so yes, there are trials going on for non-clear cell variants. The pattern that we tend to see, of course, is that the global trials that are sort of front page on the ASCO news and that are rolling out globally tend to be clear cell only, and that has changed, and that's why I wanted to highlight the studies that I did, the 2 papillary trials. And it was important to me to make a point that it's not all clear cell kidney cancer, right? I see kidney cancer all day in my practice, and I saw only kidney cancer patients in my practice today. I'm still here. And, I saw not only clear cell kidney cancer patients, right? And there are now studies that we are conducting specifically in papillary kidney cancer, specifically in chromophobe kidney cancer, specifically in medullary kidney cancer. And that by itself is a paradigm shift, because, if you go back only 10, 15 years, the paradigm was always you do trials for clear cell kidney cancer, and then you do a trial for all the rest. And the all the rest principle never really worked out quite well, because they're not all the same, and they should not be treated the same way as we think through elegant ways to treat their cancer. So that shift only happened recently, and it happened with help of patient advocacy. There are grants that are now being put out, on patients' behalfs to fund rare kidney cancer efforts. And there are now companies that are being interested. Lenvatinib pembrolizumab is a combination that's effective in clear cell kidney cancer that's now being tested in papillary, translocation, chromophobe, unclassified kidney cancer. We did the same here with cabozantinib nivolumab, which we found to be very effective. And then there are also new efforts for, cancers that are very different in their biology. So for instance, medullary kidney cancer, which are completely different from everything we've discussed so far and are treated with chemotherapies. There are novel chemotherapeutic agents that are being tested in smaller clinical trials that tend to be done at centers of expertise, maybe not with 100 hospitals, but maybe with 2 or 3 hospitals. So there are efforts going on in this space, and I am hopeful that we will see outcomes improve, as we have seen over the last couple of years.
Great. Thank you.
I would just add that in the past, the way this always worked is it was tested in clear cell and then it was extended to non-clear cell. And that's largely because the mechanisms and the biology of clear cell were better known than they were in non-clear cell, but that's changed. And as Martin says, as we now know the genomic alterations in the non-clear cells, we can target them more effectively. And there's agents, being developed and are developed, specifically looking at, c-Met and other, agents that are targeting specific subtypes of kidney cancer. So it's not just an afterthought, it's actually a direct result of the science.
Great. Thank you for both of those answers. It's now my pleasure, coming all the way from Michigan. I think we've got Sally who's going to come up here and ask a question. Sally, there you go. You need to unmute for us. Can you unmute? There you go. Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Well, I am currently on the belzutifan and the lenvatinib trial. And so my question to you is, what is the earliest we can hope for an approval of those two drugs?
So thank you, Sally. So Sally is referencing a combination of a medication that's already approved, or two medications that are already approved by themselves now being used together. Lenvatinib, which is one of the oral angiogenesis inhibitors, and belzutifan, the drug that we've talked about a couple of times now as a HIF inhibitor. And there's a number of studies for this combination going on, so I don't know exactly which trial you're on, but there's an effort that is aimed very much towards, and that goes to the core of your question, towards what we call the registration strategy. So there's a randomized study that is happening in patients who have already had other treatments and then go on to need a new strategy. And they're randomized to either receive cabozantinib, which is one of the most commonly used medications in that situation, or the combination of the HIF inhibitor belzutifan with lenvatinib as an oral VEGF inhibitor.
The randomization, I'm taking the belzutifan.
Right. So this trial has not completed accrual yet, right? So for any registration trial, the sequence of events of what happens is patients go on the study, all the planned spots on the study are filled, and then the two treatment arms are being followed over time to compare outcomes, with sufficient time to provide information on how effective the therapies are. So because this trial has not fully accrued yet, there will still be new patients coming into the study early this year. The anticipation is that first half of 2022, the study is going to complete accrual because it's accruing very well. There's a lot of interest in that combination. And then I can't tell you exactly how long it's going to read out, but typically it takes at least several months after the last patient goes on because we have to see how everyone is doing and how their cancer is responding or not to the therapy. Then the analysis pursues, and then once the data has been presented, the companies will go to the FDA or to the EMA, the agencies in the various countries to present their findings and request approval. So, I can't speak to the exact timelines here, but typically the whole process is, in the order of many months to a few years. So from the time that the last patient went on therapy, there's a few months at least that is needed until you can get that analysis and take that to the agencies. So this still being ongoing. Hopefully we will get results towards the end of the year and take it from there.
I'm having great results with it.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you so much. And thank you for participating in that study, Sally, truly.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask a question that was sent in here. It's going to be a two-pronged question for both. First of all, it was touched on earlier. Are there any trials and research on adjuvant treatments, which you touched on in your slides? But I want to go a step further. Any news in the CAR T field in solid tumors that you could talk to?
So it's really two questions. Maybe we'll split it between the two of us because Bob is doing a lot of work in the adjuvant space. So maybe I'll let you answer that, and then I can speak to CAR T afterwards.
Sure. So as I alluded, the adjuvant space has really been wrought with negative trials. There are just two positive trials to date, and both led to approvals. In the immuno-oncology space, there's at least 4 more trials that have been fully accrued and are maturing their data. Unlike what Dr. Voss was talking about, those often take years before you know the answer. You have to have a certain number of events, and so it may be 2-3 years before from closure of the trial till you actually know if it helped. As I said before, adding belzutifan to pembrolizumab appears to be, one of the next generation adjuvant trials, and I think that will start accruing relatively shortly this year. And adding a couple of those combinations together, I suspect the more positive trials you get in the immuno-oncology space, the more there'll be maybe a TKI IO trial in the adjuvant setting. But right now it's belzutifan and pembrolizumab what gives people the most excitement.
Excuse me, Dr. Uzzo, just for those folks that might be new to this, could you just give it a brief explanation of adjuvant?
Sure, absolutely. So adjuvant therapy, adjuvant just means in addition to, right, an adjunct. So you have surgery, you think you've had all your tumor removed surgically, and then why would it ever come back, right? Why would cancer ever recur if you've removed it all surgically? And the answer is that there's sometimes microscopic disease or microscopic metastases. And the adjuvant therapy is intended to treat those, mop it up, if you will, get rid of the microscopic cells that may have been left behind unknowingly, surgically. If the tumor had sort of already left the primary tumor in the kidney and sort of been circulating about, these microscopic cells, they may be killed by your own immune system, or they may just lay dormant for months or years and then crop up. So adjuvant therapy is an attempt to try to kill those microscopic cells that may have escaped the surgeon's knife.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Voss, do you want to take on the CAR-T question?
Yeah, so maybe I'll explain a little bit, give a bit of background on, what CAR T cells are and why they've been, creating a lot of buzz. So, we've mentioned immunotherapy, multiply during, this session here, and obviously it's been a huge success across various malignancies in human oncology. And all the immunotherapies that we have approved for kidney cancers work by activating the immune cells that the patients carry within them. So we give you medications to activate your own immune cells to fight cancer. Now, what CAR T cells are cells, human immune cells that have been taken out of the human, either the patient themselves or a donor, and have been modified in the lab to become more aggressive. Kind of like RoboCop in the 80s, if you think back to that movie. So you take a human immune cell, which is an effector cell that has the properties needed to kill a cancer cell, and now you enhance it in the lab with certain molecular features that make it more powerful, more potent, and most importantly, you equip it with, if you will, a sensor that can recognize and detect cancer cells. I told you before, the problem with the immune system in cancer cells in anyone with metastatic cancer is that the immune system often is ignorant to the cancer cells being there in the first place. So we can redirect these engineered cancer cells to sort of sniff out the cancer cells, find them, and then attack them efficiently. And that principle was first developed, proven effectual in patients with leukemia, patients with lymphoma. And that makes sense because their cancer is in the circulation. So if you modify these immune cells in the lab and reinfuse them in the patient, you have them right where you need them. They go to the circulation, they go to the bone marrow and so forth. The tricky thing with solid tumor malignancies is if you have the perfect cell, you still need to get it into the metastases, into the tumors. And that has taken a couple of years, but now there are efforts ongoing in solid tumor malignancies that are testing various CAR T cell based strategies. And the two main ones worth mentioning are off-the-shelf CAR Ts, and those are CAR T cells where a company uses cells that are not the patient's own, so donor T cells that are modified so that they can be given to any patient. They're a good fit for everyone. And then the second strategy, which is more complicated, you harvest immune cells of the patients themselves and then take their immune cells and modify them further in the lab. And both have their merits, both have their drawbacks and advantages, but both of them are now being investigated in kidney cancer. There's no data in the public domain that has been presented already for kidney cancer specifically in these strategies, but the relevant point is that there are now kidney cancer clinical trials that are pursuing these strategies in in RCC specifically.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Voss. I think what we're going to do is, for folks who are on, if you could take a look at the chat, there's a link to our social meeting that's going to happen right after this. You're welcome to come join us for a social opportunity to meet some of your fellow colleagues. I want to end a little bit off topic here, Dr. Voss and Dr. Uzzo. In this pandemic, with the rise of telehealth, can you give us your prognosis of the future on telehealth going forward?
Sure, I'll start that. The good parts of telehealth is that it allows patients to get opinions from people across the country, and that makes it very easy to sort of, not have to travel, to centers of excellence for an opinion and for, expertise. The other good part about telehealth is, you don't have to wait in a doctor's office for an hour and a half to see him or her. Unfortunately, it does remove sort of the element of sort of seeing somebody and looking them in the eye and feeling comfortable, though, that's the person you want to take you through this journey. So on the surgical side, for me, I may meet a lot of people via telehealth, but before we have surgery, we sit down and we make sure that, that we agree what the goals are, what we hope to achieve, and how we're going to get there together. And I think that, telehealth won't be able to remove or fix that human element. It's a necessary part of the job we do.
Great. Dr. Voss, you want to give any closing comments here before we start wrapping things up?
Closing comments about telehealth or closing comments in general?
No, I'll make it easy for you. Why don't you give us your prognostication for 2022 and beyond and how it looks for kidney cancer?
I think we're going to see a lot more data come out. I see, you see that in the timelines we looked at before, the pace of discovery, has not lessened. It's only gone up. And remember that this is all happening in the midst of a pandemic. Just imagine what we can achieve if we can overcome, and that actually ties into the telehealth question very nicely, right? So the patient's dedication and curiosity, the doctor's efforts have not lessened, and they will only continue. As science has sped up and the pace of discovery has, so has drug development, integration of multidisciplinary care, integrating, immunology and understanding molecular biology into how we develop new strategies in the surgical sphere, in the med-onc drug development sphere, and so forth. And everything that we have learned doesn't go away; it only adds, right? So it's not like we're gonna see a slowdown of how well we understand kidney cancer. I think we're going to understand, keep on understanding it more and finding, more angles to get at this and offer good treatments to our patient. And a good way to think through that is that the same medication we were using a couple of years ago remain effective. For instance, I told you sunitinib was one of the main standards approved in 2006. And when it was used at the time, as a first-line strategy on the registration trial, the median overall survival was, studied at the time using the same drug in the first-line setting, in the same setting for the same type cancer. We now see survival times, that are more than 1.5 times what it was then with that same drug, and that's because, for one, we're all using the medications better. And secondly, because we have so many adjunctive therapies, subsequent therapies, and so forth that we can use in order to make our patients live better and live longer. I think that's incredibly important to recognize. And I think it gives me a lot of hope for 2022.
Well, I think that's a great summary. That gives a lot of hope to a lot of folks on this call. Dr. Uzzo, I'm going to give you the final opportunity to share your prognostication.
Well, I like to say that I'm halfway through my career, about 20 years deep. When I first started this journey, if you had advanced kidney cancer, your overall survival was measured in a year or so, and now it's 5x that, and in many cases more. There's been very few professions, very few physicians who've seen that much progress in their field in half their professional lifetime. And I suspect that, as Dr. Voss said, that acceleration will occur at rapid pace. And I do think, I can't say when, but I do think we'll get to a point where overall that this is a chronic disease, and that as a chronic disease, we can hold this at bay. In many cases, successfully cure it, but in those that we can't, give them many, many years. Not just 3 or 4 or 5. And I don't think that's too distant in the future.
Great. Well, I first of all want to thank you, Dr. Voss and Dr. Uzzo, this time today. It's been great to get the look back, the retrospective, as well as looking forward. It does give a lot of us hope to see what's coming down the pike in this synergy that's been created in this ecosystem or community. Couple of housekeeping notes. One, we provided earlier a link to our community social. It was in the email that came to you earlier today for a reminder if you didn't get it out of the chat. We're going to go over to that right after this. Again, we couldn't have done this without the support of our sponsors, BMS and ASI and Genentech. Thank you very much. But most importantly, thank you for the audience for being with us today to hear from these two experts. We really appreciate it. So on that note, thank you all. Look forward to you all seeing you at our next town hall. And if you haven't signed up for our spring advocacy days to raise some more federal funds for kidney cancer research, sign up today. Thank you, Dr. Voss. Thank you, Dr. Uzzo.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for having us.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Stay healthy.
And you will.